Imagine a world where there is no 911 to call when a nation is attacked. No central authority, no night watchman, and no higher ruling body to protect the weak from the strong. This is not a dystopian fantasy. It is the fundamental reality of international politics. For centuries, great powers have been trapped in an iron cage, fated to compete for power not because they are inherently evil, but because the system itself demands it for their survival. Today, we investigate the offensive realism that drives the United States, Russia, and China into a collision course, and how the pursuit of universal freedom often ends in a tragedy of blood and oil. To understand the current tensions in the South China Sea or the frozen plains of Eastern Europe, we must first master the theory of offensive realism. As political scientist John Mearsheimer argues, the international system is defined by anarchy not in the sense of chaos, but in the sense that there is no government over governments. This system rests on 5 bedrock assumptions. First, the lack of a central authority. Second, that every great power has the offensive military capability to hurt its neighbors. Third, bad intentions are ultimately unknowable. A friend today can be a foe tomorrow. Fourth, that the primary goal of any state is survival. And fifth, that states are rational actors. When you marry these assumptions together, the result is a world of fear, self-help, and power maximization. In this environment, the best guarantee of safety is not a treaty, but hegemony being the only great power in the system. This is the tragedy. Great powers that have no reason to fight, that are merely concerned with their own safety, are nevertheless fated to compete. It is a security dilemma, where the measures a state takes to feel safe automatically make its neighbor feel threatened, triggering a vicious circle of arms accumulation. In this realist world, states are not judged by their ideals, but like billiard balls, they are distinguished only by their size and the speed with which they move across the table. While Mearsheimer provides the map, military historian Andrew J. Bacevich provides the history of how the United States became the primary navigator of this tragic system. For decades, the U.S. treated the Middle East as a secondary theater, in the larger story of the Cold War. But in 1980, everything changed. The year 1979 was a seismic thunderclap. The Iranian Revolution toppled a key U.S. surrogate, and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan placed the Red Army within striking distance of the West as oil supply. In response, Jimmy Carter, perhaps the least bellicose of modern presidents, issued the Carter Doctrine. He declared that any attempt by an outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf would be regarded as an assault on the vital interests of the United States. Bacevich argues that this was the start of World War IV. It was a war to preserve the American way of life, a specific understanding of freedom that required an abundance of cheap energy. Suddenly, the U.S. military center of gravity moved thousands of miles to the east. To support this new mission, the Pentagon created CENTCOM, a 4-star headquarters that signified an enduring commitment. In an almost imperceptible shift, diplomacy took a back seat to military imperatives. The sledgehammer of the U.S. military was being transformed into a sculptor's chisel used to shape the region to fit American interests. But the tragedy, as Bacevich notes, is that military muscle was frequently applied without political acuity. The first major campaign of this new era was fought in the shadows of the Hindu Kush. Operation Cyclone, the CIA's program to arm the Afghan Mujahedin against the Soviet Union, became the largest covert operation in history. CIA officers like Howard Hart viewed the jihad through a purely realist lens. The mission was to kill Soviets. Hart and his colleagues were unconcerned with the religious ideology of their clients. They believed they could rent the loyalty of Afghan warlords like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar to give the USSR its own Vietnam. But the United States did not own this empire alone. It had to subcontract its aid through Pakistan's spy agency, the EC. This created a double game that would haunt U.S. policy for decades. The EC used CIA money and weapons to build its own army within the army, favoring radical Islamists over traditional tribal leaders to ensure that any post-war Afghan government would be a pro-Pakistan puppet. As investigative journalist Steve Call reveals, this was a struggle among ghosts. The Mujahedin were America's surrogate soldiers, yet U.S. policymakers appeared oblivious to the actual nature of the struggle. We celebrated the arrival of Stinger missiles as the turning point that humbled the bear, but we failed to see that we were exacerbating a second problem while solving the first, planting the seeds for the rise of Islamic radicalism. The tragedy reached a new level of complexity after the 9/11 attacks. The U.S. returned to Afghanistan to dismantle the very networks it had inadvertently helped nurture. But the North Star of this conflict wasn't just in Kabul. It was in the hidden offices of Directorate S in Islamabad. Directorate S was the compartmented wing of the EC responsible for secret operations in support of the Taliban and other jihadi clients. While Pakistani generals like Ashfaq Kayani played tennis and discussed Western literature with American attaches like Dave Smith, their subordinates were providing sanctuary and supplies to the very insurgents killing American soldiers. The U.S. was trapped in a schizophrenic alliance. We relied on Pakistan for logistics and counterterrorism tips while knowing they were playing a giant double cross. At one point, the CIA and the Afghan NBS provided the EC with specific addresses of Taliban leaders in Quetta. Within 48 hours, every one of them had vanished, tipped off by the very agency supposed to be our ally. This is the chicken shit club of geopolitics, a failure of leadership to confront a partner because the magnitude of dysfunction makes the truth too costly to admit. As General Martin Dempsey lamented in 2015, the chaos in the region had become a generational problem with no clean ending in sight. Why does the world's mightiest military achieve so little in these conflicts? Basevich points to a phenomenon called military metaphysics, the seduction of seeing all problems as military problems. In 1991, the Gulf War was hailed as a Norman Rockwell painting come to life, a mission accomplished moment that supposedly kicked the Vietnam Syndrome. General Norman Schwarzkopf famously delivered the mother of all briefings, declaring that the gates were closed for the Iraqi army, but the reality was a stain on the narrative. The war ended with an atrocity, the shooting down of Iran Air 655, a civilian airliner with 290 people on board, by a U.S. cruiser that claimed an inherent right to self-defense despite being in Iranian waters. The U.S. refused to apologize, even as it awarded medals to the crew. This culture of impunity is the byproduct of what Basevich calls the new American militarism. We became enamored with the aesthetic respectability of high-tech war, the whiz-bang technology of stealth fighters and precision bombs that promised to make war thrilling and cost-effective. We began to believe that the U.S. military was so awesome that it no longer needed to make compromises or accommodations. But in doing so, we ignored the hoary dictums of war, the fog, the friction, and the fact that an Olympian perspective is often a hallucination. Today, the tragedy of great power politics is moving into a new, more dangerous phase: remote death. As investigative journalist Andrew Cockburn explains, we have created a kill chain where killing has become a video game. In the Global Response Center at Langley, analysts watch patterns of life on high-definition screens, thousands of miles from the battlefield. They use effects-based operations to target specific critical nodes, killing individuals to shape an enemy network. But the technology is legally blind. In 2010, In the Uruzgan district of Afghanistan, U.S. drone operators observed a group of vehicles. They saw dismounts, praying, and pulling security. They identified them as a high-value Taliban target. In reality, they were a group of civilians, including 3 children. The unblinking eye saw what it wanted to see, an attack profile, because the algorithm was built on worst-case assumptions. This is the Faustian impulse identified by Mearsheimer, a quest for unlimited knowledge in space. We are entering an era where artificial intelligence will decide who lives and who dies, removing the last vestiges of human reflection from the act of war. As Henry Kissinger observes, the emergence of AI transforms strategy into a black box where we can no longer explain or defend our decisions. We stand now at a historic crossroads. The Cold War order has vanished, and in its place is a multipolar system that is fundamentally unstable. Mearsheimer's theory offers a chilling forecast. A rising China will seek regional hegemony, just as the U.S. did in the 19th century. It will develop its own Monroe Doctrine, telling the United States that its meddling in Asia is no longer acceptable. The U.S., as the offshore balancer, will be compelled to encircle China, leading to an unbalanced multipolarity that is the most dangerous configuration of power. The tragedy is that both sides will be acting rationally. China will pursue power to ensure its survival. The U.S. will resist to ensure its own. It is a perpetual motion machine of conflict where even good intentions are ground down by the gears of anarchy. Meanwhile, at home, the war for the greater Middle East has become a permanent fixture, accepted as a background noise of modern life. We have successfully insulated the public from the war's effects by relying on a professional warrior caste, sloughing the bill off onto future generations through deficit spending. We have spent 3 decades and trillions of dollars trying to shape the world. We have built dark towers of finance to fund it, and black boxes of technology to manage it. But the world remains defiantly resistant to our sculpting. The tragedy of great power politics is not that we have failed to achieve our goals, but that the goals themselves are an illusion. As Reinhold Niebuhr warned at the dawn of the Cold War, the dreams of managing history are a conceit that leads to catastrophe. We live in a black box society that resembles a one-way mirror. We can see the targets on our screens, but we cannot see the consequences of our actions. We can see the power we possess, but we cannot see the limits of that power. You have seen the shadows of the shadow state files. You have seen the logic of anarchy and the tragedy of ambition. Now, the question is, will we continue to let the machine grind forward, or will we demand an intelligible society where transparency replaces fear and realism replaces the romance of design? The shadows are receding. The choice is yours.